The morning sun had barely peeked over the hills when I shuffled out to feed the chickens. My boots crunched softly on the gravel, and the barn cat, Shadow, trailed behind me like usual, meowing for attention. For 75 years, I'd started my mornings this way, same ranch, same routine, same peace. But that morning, everything changed. I stopped dead in my tracks. A tall metal fence, shiny, industrial, completely out of place, stretched straight across my driveway like a scar. The gate, locked with a thick chain, cut off access from the county road to my ranch entrance. It hadn't been there the night before. I would have heard the commotion, the post drivers, the trucks. But it was there now, and it was bold. There was a laminated sign zip-tied to the chain. HOA Access Control Measure. Authorized vehicles only. For community security. I blinked, thinking maybe I was reading it wrong. My ranch wasn't some suburban cul-de-sac. It was a 40-acre parcel that had been in my family since 1927. Willow Ridge Ranches, the last real open land on this side of the ridge. The kind of place where time slowed down and fences were built for cattle, not politics. Now this nonsense. I turned slowly, heart thudding. Not from fear, but from the rising heat in my chest. I'd had run-ins with the HOA before. They'd sent flyers about beautification expectations and neighborhood uniformity. But I'd always ignored them. They didn't apply to me. My land had never been part of any housing development, never signed into any homeowners association. I had original deeds signed in blue ink, sealed by the county, sitting in a fireproof box under my bed. But this fence, this was a line crossed. I stormed back inside, called the HOA office number listed on the sign. It went to voicemail, figures. So I waited. Around 9:00 a.m. I heard the sound of heels on gravel. I stepped out onto the porch and spotted her clipboard in hand, mirrored sunglasses. Hair pulled back so tight it could slice cheese. Sharon. I'd seen her at the farmer's market once, complaining that the squash display wasn't very aesthetically pleasing. She wasn't elected to anything, just sort of took over after the last HOA board president moved out. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she chirped, like she was welcoming me to my own property. I didn't respond. She strode up to the fence, tapped the sign with her pen like a game show hostess. "This is our new community security barrier. We had a vote 72% in favor. It's to ensure controlled traffic flow and reduce non-resident trespassing. We hope you understand." I crossed my arms. "Sharon, what in God's name makes you think you can fence off my driveway?" She smiled that tight-lipped smile, the kind that meant she wasn't really listening. "Well, technically, your driveway connects to a shared access lane that is now under HOA jurisdiction. Annexation Clause 403C. It gives us permission to implement security enhancements in the interest of community welfare. Annexation. My driveway. This land predates your HOA by 80 years, I said. This ranch was here before there was even a road. You can't just show up and slap a fence across it." She flipped a page on her clipboard. "That's what this meeting is about. I brought you a compliance package. If you just sign the acknowledgement form and register your property with the HOA, you'll be granted a transponder for the gate." She handed me a glossy folder with a logo that looked like a country club and a smiling family on the cover. I opened it. "Welcome to Willow Haven Estates, HOA bringing order to your homestead." I blinked at the absurdity. My name wasn't even listed properly. They spelled it William Thompsonson. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You put a fence across my land, and now I have to pay you to get back into it." Sharon laughed. "Oh no, it's not about paying. It's about aligning with community values. You'd get access to our landscaping services, our seasonal newsletters, even pool privileges." "I have a pond," I said flatly. She blinked. "And goats, and a wood stove, and an actual axe I'm seriously thinking about using to take that fence down." Her smile twitched. "Threats of vandalism won't help your case, Mr. Thompson, and setting up an unauthorized barrier across my land won't help yours." She cleared her throat. "Until your registration is processed, I'm afraid we can't permit vehicle access. You can use the pedestrian gate for now. Thank you, and have a blessed day." And just like that, she turned on her heel and strutted back down the gravel, like she hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of my life. I stared at that fence for a long time. Then I walked back inside, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and pulled out my deed. Because if Sharon wanted a war, she'd just picked the wrong cowboy to mess with. The next morning, I was sitting on my porch with a mug of black coffee, staring out at that absurd fence like it was some kind of alien artifact. The metal still glinted in the sunlight, like a smug grin. I hadn't slept much. I'd gone over every document I owned, from my grandfather's original land grant to the plat maps I'd kept in a dusty binder since the 80s. All of it said the same thing: the access road was mine. The land beneath it was mine. And that fence, it was illegal. At 8:15 sharp, I heard the same click of heels on gravel. I didn't even have to look. I knew it was her. Sharon strutted up in a khaki blazer with an HOA logo embroidered on the chest. That same clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of honor. Her sunglasses reflected the sun and my growing irritation. "Good morning again, Mr. Thompson," she said with rehearsed cheer. "I'm here to follow up on your compliance packet. Have you had a chance to review it?" I sipped my coffee without moving from the rocking chair. I burned it. She blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." "Set it on fire. In my wood stove. Made a good starter." Her lips twitched. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you understand that non-compliance may result in escalating fines." "Fines for what?" I asked. "For living on my own land." Sharon flipped a page on her clipboard, tapping the paper with her pen. "Your property is now under review for several violations. Number 1, unauthorized fencing structure not approved by the HOA. Number 2, unregistered livestock grazing in common view areas. And number 3, unpermitted signage, specifically the keep out signs on your southern fence line." I stared at her. "You mean the signs I put up 20 years ago to keep coyotes and city tourists from wandering into my goat pen?" She nodded seriously, as if I'd just confessed to a capital crime. "We're committed to maintaining a unified neighborhood aesthetic. Aggressive signage sends the wrong message." "Good," I said, "because the message is stay off my land." Sharon smiled tightly again. "You're clearly a proud property owner, and that's wonderful. But the community has evolved. We're working toward harmony and order, and frankly, you're disrupting that." I stood slowly, letting the chair creak as I rose. "Let me ask you something, Sharon. When did you get the right to speak for the whole community?" She bristled. "I was elected HOA president during the last board transition." "By who? The other 3 people who moved in last year. I've been here since before there was a subdivision. Before your cookie-cutter homes popped up like mushrooms after a storm." Sharon waved her clipboard like it gave her superpowers. "Whether you acknowledge it or not, your property borders a regulated HOA district now, and due to shared ingress, you're subject to governing oversight." "That's a lot of fancy talk for someone who just trespassed," I said. She hesitated. "This is public business. I'm acting in an official capacity." "No, you're standing on my private land with a clipboard full of made-up rules and a serious misunderstanding of property law." Sharon stepped back, clearly rattled. "We're offering a path to resolution, Mr. Thompson. But your attitude is making this adversarial. It became adversarial when you put up a fence in the dead of night." We stared each other down across the dusty driveway. "Finally," she sighed, "I'll be back tomorrow with a formal notice of non-compliance. Have a blessed day." As she walked away, I watched her jot something down, probably hostile tone or resistance level high. She passed the fence like it was hers, stepped into her SUV parked half a mile down the road, the only place she could, since the gate blocked her own development's access to. The irony made me laugh. I walked back into this house and pulled out my county tax records. I needed more than indignation. I needed ammunition. If she wanted to play legal games, I'd beat her at them with facts, not feelings. That afternoon, a farm supply truck pulled up at the back gate, honking. I walked out and explained that the front entrance was blocked. The driver scratched his head and asked how he was supposed to deliver the feed. "Back up through the cattle trail," I told him, "or come back tomorrow with a lawyer." The driver laughed, but I didn't, because this wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was a declaration. They wanted compliance. I wanted truth, and truth was on my side. By the time Sharon returned the next morning, her khaki blazer swapped out for a pastel windbreaker. As if soft colors would soften her agenda, I was ready. I'd laid out everything on the porch table maps, deeds, the original land survey signed by my grandfather's trembling hand in 1955, and even a copy of the subdivision plat that clearly showed the HOA boundary ending 100 feet before my driveway began. But Sharon didn't glance at any of it. She walked up with a smug tilt to her chin, clipboard ready, and announced, "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. As of today, you're officially in violation of Willow Haven Estates covenants and restrictions. Sections 2.4, 3.1, and 4.2b. I didn't even bother standing up this time. "You're not listening," I said. "This land isn't under your HOA. Never has been, never will be. I didn't sign anything. I didn't opt in. You have no legal authority here." Sharon clicked her pen like it was a gavel. Annexation clause, Mr. Thompson. When the last 5 homes in the lower loop were completed, the HOA was granted jurisdiction over all adjacent access points for traffic flow and visual uniformity. That includes your driveway. I shook my head. That clause may work for homes built after the HOA was formed, but this ranch predates the entire development. My deed doesn't list any easements. The only reason you even use this road is because I let the county pave it 30 years ago out of goodwill. You don't own it. I do. She waved the clipboard, exasperated. "You're being hostile again. This is not how neighbors behave." "No. This is exactly how neighbors behave when someone tries to pull a fast one on them." She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was confiding in me. "Look, I know change is hard. I get it. You've lived here forever. You're used to doing things your way. But Willow Haven has standards. We're building a community." I stood now, not fast, just firm. "This ain't a suburb," I said. "It's a ranch, a working one. That fence you put up blocked 2 vet appointments, a hay delivery, and a kid from the 4-H club who's been helping me train a rescue horse. Your clipboard doesn't outrank the law, and it sure as hell doesn't outrank history." She folded her arms. "You're going to regret being so difficult." "Maybe," I said, "but not today." She turned to leave, but not before leaving a manila envelope on my table. "Your official violation notice. You have 10 days to comply before fines escalate." I let it sit there like a dead fish. Later that day, the compliance crew showed up 2 guys in matching polos and a golf cart with a magnetic decal that read WHE Field Team. They parked near the fence and started taking photos of my barn, my windmill, even the wildflowers I'd let grow near the fence line to help the bees. I walked over. "You boys lost." The older one, maybe in his 30s, cleared his throat. "We're conducting a visual inventory for compliance assessment. Did you get permission from the landowner?" "We were told this was HOA managed property." "Well, now you've been told different. Get off my land." They left, but slowly, like they were sure they'd be back with a badge next time. That evening, the feed delivery guy called to cancel, said he'd been stopped at the gate, and told he'd need a special HOA vendor permit. I didn't even know what that was, but I knew what it meant. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was harassment. I called the sheriff's office, but the dispatcher said civil disputes between HOAs and residents were low priority, unless criminal behavior occurred. I laughed bitterly. "So blocking a working ranch's only entrance doesn't count." "We'll file a note," this dispatcher said, "but unless it turns violent or involves trespassing, we can't intervene." Funny, I thought. They were trespassing, just with pens instead of boots. I sat on my porch well into the evening, watching the sun dip behind the ridge, thinking about my grandfather and the way he used to say, "You give an inch, they'll pave a road right through you." He wasn't wrong. I pulled out a folded county map and traced the little black line that marked my access road, the same road they now claimed was theirs. It ended at my property line, started on my land, and nowhere on that map did it say Willow Haven Estates. This wasn't a suburb, and I wasn't going anywhere. The next 3 days were a study in passive-aggressive warfare. It began with the trash. My bin, normally emptied every Tuesday morning like clockwork, was mysteriously skipped. I called the waste service, and the guy on the other end told me, "Oh, Willow Haven HOA submitted a change to your service contract. Said your address no longer qualifies for individual pickup. You're now on community collection." I laughed. "I'm not part of Willow Haven." "Then you'll need to clarify that with them. We're just following their property registry." Click. I hauled my own garbage into town, like it was 1972. Next, a notice appeared on my mailbox, one of those laminated, self-important printouts with the HOA seal that Sharon probably designed herself in Microsoft Word. "Unregistered livestock observed within 100 feet of community frontage. Violation of Willow Haven Ordinance 7.3.2b. $125. Fine assessed. The photo attached, because of course there was a photo, showed Bessie, my funeral dairy cow, standing near the west fence, chewing cud like the criminal mastermind she was. The absurdity would have been funny if it hadn't kept escalating. The following day, 2 men in khaki shirts showed up, wearing WHE compliance enforcement badges. One had a tape measure, the other had a drone. A drone. I caught them on my security camera, buzzing over my chicken coop. One of the hens, Mabel, freaked out and bolted into a wire post. She limped for the rest of the day. I stormed out and waved them down. "You don't have permission to be here," I shouted. "We're measuring setback distances," the younger one mumbled, "ensuring outbuildings adhere to subdivision spacing guidelines." "This isn't a subdivision," I snapped. "This is a ranch. You're trespassing." They shrugged. "We were told this land was in a shared governance zone." "Then you were told wrong." I reported them to the sheriff, again, and again got told this is a civil matter. On Thursday, the fence was reinforced, new posts, heavier metal, and a coded padlock. Sharon left a voicemail on my landline saying, "Until we reach agreement, the barrier will remain for the safety of all residents." That afternoon, a horse delivery I'd scheduled for a young girl training for 4-H was canceled. The hauler said he was stopped at the gate by a woman in sunglasses who told him the private road was under HOA lockdown. I felt it in my chest, the slow-burning anger of being pushed, cornered, denied the freedom of my own dirt. That night, I drove out the long way, using the rocky service trail I hadn't touched in years, just to buy fencing supplies. When I returned home, someone had left a stack of new citations in a clear plastic envelope on my porch, including improper barn lighting after 9 p.m., failure to submit soil erosion plan, unpermitted driveway expansion. I hadn't touched my driveway in 10 years. The final straw came when my granddaughter Sophie came to visit for the weekend. She's 12, bright as a whip, loves feeding the goats. Her mom dropped her off at the subdivision gate, and Sophie had to walk a quarter mile because the HOA no visitor rule had been invoked for undeclared minors. When she reached the porch, cheeks red and breath short, she looked up at me and asked Grandpa, "Did I do something wrong?" I clenched my jaw. "Not a thing, sweetheart." She frowned. "That lady at the gate yelled at me." That night, I sat with an old bourbon bottle and unfolded every deed, every plat map, and every letter of correspondence I'd ever had with the county. I spread them across my kitchen table like battle plans, and there it was, a single page from 1996, a recorded easement grant that had expired in 2011. It confirmed what I already suspected, but hadn't dared to believe the subdivision's only paved access road, the one they use daily, the one they built that stupid fence on, was technically still deeded to me. And it hadn't been transferred, not legally, not officially, not even through eminent domain. They weren't blocking my driveway. They were driving on my land. The next morning, I shaved, put on my old denim jacket with the stitched name tag from the county fair, and drove straight to the assessor's office. I showed the documents to a clerk named Brenda. She raised her eyebrows, then called her supervisor. Within an hour, I had 2 stamped and signed confirmations. My property boundary included the access road. The HOA had no recorded legal easement on file. I stood there, documents in hand, the weight of months of frustration suddenly replaced by something sharper. Clarity and a plan. I wasn't going to call a lawyer. Not yet. I was going to let them keep their fence, but I was going to make them pay for it. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of anxiety that had come and gone weeks ago, but out of planning. I had spent my entire life raising livestock, fixing broken machinery with duct tape and baling wire, and negotiating hay prices with people who thought shouting was a substitute for fairness. But now, every ounce of that patience had solidified into resolve. When the sun came up over the hills, golden and crisp, I stood at the edge of the driveway, sipping burnt coffee from my enamel mug and staring at the fence Sharon's crew had built. It was no ordinary barrier. This thing was industrial, 6 feet tall, powder-coated, reinforced with locking joints, and topped with sharp decorative spikes. I had to give it to her if she wanted to make a statement. She'd succeeded. But today, I had a statement of my own. I grabbed the property documents, tucked them into a folder, and drove back to the assessor's office, this time to request official maps printed with boundary overlays. The clerk, Brenda, looked at me the way someone does when they're half concerned and half impressed. She knew what I was about to do. Then I made a stop at the hardware store and picked up paint, lumber, chain, hinges, 2 steel plates, and 1 very large padlock. When I got back, the air was heavy and still. No breeze, no birds. Just that awful tension you feel before something snaps. I didn't waste time. First, I spray painted the property boundary line across the road in fire engine red. 10 feet of bold defiance, starting at the end of my driveway and cutting clean across the HOA's beloved cul-de-sac like a scar. Then I hung a new wooden sign from the old oak tree at the edge of the drive. Private property, no HOA access beyond this point. Trespassers will be charged accordingly. I backed up my truck, turned on the hazard lights, and walked over to the gate. I snapped photos, close-ups, wide shots, even selfies with the documents in hand. Because I wasn't just going to do this, I was going to do it legally. Then I placed the steel notice plates on either side of the gate, road under private ownership. Temporary fee for community use, $20 per vehicle. Cash or Venmo accepted. No exceptions. The moment I hung the last plate, a voice shrieked from across the road. "You can't do that!" Sharon was storming toward me in her yoga pants and HOA lanyard, like the righteous angel of suburbia. "This road is under shared jurisdiction," she barked. "Not according to the county," I replied, holding up the stamped deed. "Expired easement, no transfer. This is mine." She looked at the document, then back at me. "You're extorting your neighbors." I shrugged. "No more than you were when you fined me for cows standing near your imaginary border." "But this is public safety," she sputtered. "No, Sharon, it's a driveway." Her jaw clenched. "This isn't over." I leaned in, voice calm. "For your sake, I hope it is." She stormed off, but not before taking out her phone and snapping photos, which I welcomed. The more documentation, the better. That night, I installed a small wooden booth at the edge of the access road. Handcrafted, rustic, and beautiful, the kind of thing you'd see at a farm stand. Inside, I set up a cash box, a sign-in ledger, and a tiny fold-out chair I hadn't used since the 1999 Fairgrounds bake sale. By morning, the sign had changed again. "Welcome to Thompson's Pass. Road access $20 per car. Proceed support local 4-H and Veterans Fund." The first few cars stopped, confused. One neighbor tried to argue, then noticed the county seal stamped on the boundary sign and silently handed me a $20. Another lady asked if I accepted Venmo. I did. She smiled and waved. By noon, I'd collected $260. That evening, I updated the town's Facebook page with the following post. Due to recent property clarification by the county, Thompson Ranch will now be charging a toll for all non-resident vehicle access across private land. This includes all Willow Haven subdivision traffic entering via the eastern gate. Thank you for your understanding and for supporting local agriculture. The comments exploded. Some were furious. "This is petty. You're holding us hostage." But others surprised me. Honestly, Sharon went too far. I'd pay $20 just to see her face. Finally, someone standing up to the HOA. And just like that, the narrative shifted. This wasn't just about a driveway anymore. It was about every rule, every fine, every letter with a red header that made people feel like criminals for planting daisies or owning a doghouse that didn't match the roof color. I hadn't planned to start a revolution, but revolutions rarely begin with plans. They begin with fences. And people who've had enough of being told they don't belong on their own land. It started with smirks and sarcasm. The first week of the toll booth operation brought more than just a few honking horns and eye rolls. Word spread like wildfire through Willow Haven. Some thought I'd gone senile. Others called me a legend, and at least one anonymous commenter on the neighborhood app accused me of economic terrorism. But the most surprising thing, people paid, reluctantly at first, begrudgingly, then oddly enough, willingly. The booth wasn't just a blockade anymore, it was a statement. A hand-carved banner now hung proudly across the roof. "Freedom ain't free, but it's fair." Every detail was rustic but deliberate: the jar of butterscotch candies on the shelf for kids, the laminated property deed on the wall, and a fresh stack of $20 bills in the register at the end of each day. I kept records, too. A full ledger, dates, plate numbers, payments, everything a lawyer might one day need. But what turned the tide, more than the paperwork or the posts online, was the story that followed the payment. Almost every driver had something to say. Sharon fined me for using colored mulch, I got cited for leaving my garage door open too long. They sent me a letter because my kid drew chalk art on the sidewalk. One man, in a silver BMW, handed me a 20, leaned close, and whispered, "I don't even care where the money goes." I just love that someone finally told her no. The best part, my granddaughter, Sophie, started helping on weekends. She made little toll receipts with markers and glitter, handed them out with a grin. She'd giggle every time someone laughed. Her joy became contagious, a kind of healing I hadn't expected. On Saturday afternoon, a car pulled up, tinted windows, spotless black paint. I assumed it was Sharon, back for round 2. But it wasn't. It was an older couple I barely knew, Henry and Clara, who lived closer to the lake. Henry handed me a check. For the whole month, he said, nodding, and thank you for what I asked. He looked over at the booth, the sign, the kids laughing on the ranch side, for reminding this town what backbone looks like. Of course, the HOA didn't stay quiet. Sharon returned in full force the next Monday, flanked by 2 board members and a man with a clipboard who introduced himself as HOA Counsel. They approached the booth like they were marching into court. "You are in violation of local traffic laws," Sharon declared. "You are obstructing a residential access point. This is private property," I replied, "documented by the county and confirmed by the assessor. You're trespassing." She handed me a cease and desist letter, printed on embossed letterhead, with more legalese than actual law. I skimmed it, chuckled, and handed it right back. "You might want to take that to the county first," I said. "They're the ones who said you're driving through my land." The lawyer opened his mouth, then paused. "We'll be reviewing the matter further." Sharon looked like she wanted to explode, but instead gave a plastic smile and muttered, "We'll see what the press says about this." I raised an eyebrow. I hope they bring cameras. And they did. 2 days later, a local reporter knocked on my door. She'd heard about the toll booth from someone on Facebook. I gave her a tour, showed her the deed, let her sit inside the booth, and shared Bessie's brush with criminal fame. The story aired that night with the title, "One Man's Road: How a Rancher Took on the HOA and Started Charging Admission." It went viral. Within 48 hours, the clip had been picked up by national outlets. I started getting letters, handwritten ones from people in Florida, Utah, even Alaska, saying things like, "We need a grandpa like you in our neighborhood. Sharonism is real. Thank you for standing up. Can I donate to your cause? I've been fined 50s for bird feeders." Sophie made me a trophy out of tinfoil and glued on pebbles. It read, "HOA Boss Slayer." It might be the proudest I've ever felt, but not everyone was cheering. That Thursday, my mailbox was smashed in. The next day, someone dumped a bag of nails across the gravel turnout by the booth. I didn't report it. I just replaced the mailbox, swept the road, and waved at every neighbor like nothing happened. Because retaliation only makes sense when it still has power. And Sharon's power was slipping. Neighbors had started using the back service trail to avoid the fee, only to find I'd posted signs reminding them it was also my land. Others began carpooling. Some walked in from the other end of the neighborhood just to chat, drop off cookies, or tell me their own HOA horror stories. Even some board members started showing cracks. At a town hall that weekend, hosted at the school gym because the clubhouse was being audited, one of the board treasurers stood up and said, "Maybe it's time we reassess our relationship with Mr. Thompson and the road access situation." Sharon tried to shout him down, but the room didn't cheer for her. It went quiet. Then someone clapped, then another, until the applause grew into something real, something final. By the end of that week, I didn't need to enforce the toll anymore. People paid out of solidarity, not just for the right to drive, but for the right to say, "This is our town, not hers." And every time a $20 bill landed in the box, I didn't think about the money. I thought about the message. Fences can divide, but they can also define. And sometimes, the line they draw is where respect finally begins. It started with a lawn chair, old Mr. Peterson, who hadn't attended an HOA meeting in 5 years and had once been fined for improperly stacked firewood. Set up a folding chair right next to the toll booth. He brought a cooler, a Bluetooth speaker softly playing bluegrass, and a handwritten cardboard sign. "Support the ranch, pay the toll." By sundown, he wasn't alone. 12 neighbors showed up the next day, not to protest, but to sit with him, each bringing a chair, a story, or a pie. The shady patch beside the booth turned into a makeshift community square. People brought their kids, let their dogs sniff around, laughed at the absurdity of the whole thing. Someone even installed a donation box labeled Legal Fund for Grandpa. But the real shift came when the Carver family, the ones Sharon had once fined 200s for having a trampoline, rolled down their windows and handed me a 20, along with a thermos of sweet tea. "Best $20 I ever spent," the dad grinned. The mom added, "Every bump in that road is worth it just to see Sharon's face every morning." Even those who once grumbled about inconvenience began using the toll booth as a form of protest. A group of teenagers made t-shirts that said, "I survived the HOA toll booth." A neighbor named Ellen began selling homemade cookies from a little table next to the chair circle, labeling them non-compliant chocolate chips. Each transaction, each giggle, each handwave was a little act of rebellion. Sharon noticed. She tried to fight back. First, she sent out a newsletter titled Urgent Community Safety Notice, Unauthorized Toll Activity. It included cherry-picked legal codes, fear-mongering about dangerous escalation, and a dramatic claim that outside actors may be infiltrating our peaceful neighborhood. Nobody took it seriously. The next day, someone graffiti tagged her mailbox, not with obscenities, but with the words, "Check the deed, Sharon." I didn't condone it, but I understood. Then she filed a formal complaint with the city. Unfortunately for her, the city's public records department had already verified that the road was, indeed, mine. The easement for subdivision access had expired years ago, never properly renewed, and had defaulted back to original ranch ownership. My toll wasn't illegal, it was inconvenient, and nothing more. The next HOA meeting was tense, held in the clubhouse, before it too would face its reckoning. Sharon stood at the front like a general under siege. Her usual allies sat stiffly at her side, but their eyes flickered unsure. Nervous. No longer loyal. "I have tried to protect this community," Sharon said, slapping her notes onto the podium, "and now we're allowing an old man to hold our neighborhood hostage for $20 a pop." Someone stood up. It was Rachel Bennett, mother of 3, librarian, and once a vocal HOA supporter. "No, Sharon," she said calmly. "We're choosing to support someone who never tried to run us, just someone who wanted to be left alone." The room murmured in agreement. Another neighbor added, "You find me $7 for wind chimes." "Wind chimes? Someone else. We still don't have a second mailbox key, and it's been 2 years. Sharon flushed. "We have procedures." Mr. Peterson's gravelly voice echoed, "Procedures ain't community." The moment was quiet. Then a woman in the back raised her hand. "Can we vote for a motion to suspend toll collection for essential services, like medical visits?" I stood. Already done. EMTs, delivery trucks, and school buses pass for free. Always have. Applause broke out, real, rolling applause. Sharon's face paled. By now, even members of the HOA board were drifting toward neutrality. One resigned. Another privately emailed me, asking if I'd consider a moderated mediation meeting. I responded politely, "Sure. Just not on my road unless you've got $20. Sophie laughed when she read that reply. More good news rolled in. A local news blog published an op-ed titled "The Man Who Tamed the HOA." And a local artist painted a mural downtown of a smiling old man holding a stop sign that read, "Respect is the toll." Sharon's control was unraveling, like a loose thread on a too-tight sweater. The final straw came on a Sunday afternoon, when I hosted what Sophie dubbed Tullapalooza. We didn't charge anything that day. Instead, we held a community barbecue right at the booth. Everyone was invited. Hot dogs, lemonade, bluegrass music, kids drawing chalk outlines on the road. I even gave a little speech, short and simple. I didn't build that toll booth to make money. I built it because no one has the right to make you feel small on your own land. This isn't about fences. It's about boundaries and standing up when someone tries to walk all over you. There were cheers. There were tears. And there was Sharon, watching from the top of the cul-de-sac, clipboard limp at her side. She didn't speak. She didn't shout. She just turned around and walked away. The booth stayed up, not for money, but as a monument, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of America, even in the most manicured communities, dignity doesn't come from rule books. It comes from the people who know where the real lines are drawn and who aren't afraid to charge fair tolls when someone crosses them. By the time Monday rolled around, The toll booth had become more than just a wooden shed at the edge of the ranch, it had become a symbol. The photos from Tullapalooza had gone viral in the local news cycle, and even a few regional stations picked it up. Reporters started calling the ranch the Gated Community Gate. Some found it hilarious. Others called it heroic. But no one, and I mean no one, was on Sharon's side anymore. What had started as a quiet protest was now a full-blown movement. And the HOA board, well, they were cracking like an old fence post in a drought. The first to jump ship was Evelyn Larson, the treasurer. She resigned via email, citing ethical concerns and procedural irregularities. But everyone knew what that meant. She wanted off the sinking ship before it hit bottom. Within 24 hours, 2 more board members stepped down, one of them leaving behind a statement that hinted at unilateral decision-making and inappropriate use of reserve funds. Sharon tried to maintain her composure. She sent out another HOA bulletin, typed in all caps, titled "The Truth About Toll Gate Ridge," accusing me of extortion, public endangerment, and creating division within a previously harmonious neighborhood. She even threatened to call in the state's Department of Transportation, but what she didn't realize was that the DOT already knew. In fact, they'd reached out to me directly after the road ownership audit hit public record. A kind gentleman named Edward Wilson called me and said, "Sir, you're well within your rights, and between you and me, we're tired of getting complaints about plastic flamingo violations." That was the moment I knew she had lost control of the narrative. The final blow came from my lawyer, Sophie's friend, David Marshall. He wasn't flashy, but he was precise, and he didn't bluff. He filed a formal complaint with the county, citing illegal obstruction of a registered private road, property damage to a historical gate under state preservation, unauthorized annexation of non-subdivision property, harassment, and targeted punitive fines without legal basis. But David didn't stop there. He sent a packet to every homeowner in the subdivision, detailing their actual property boundaries, HOA voting rights, and the legally unenforceable clauses Sharon had been waving around like gospel. He even included a chart comparing the original HOA bylaws with the ones she had amended without quorum. The packet ended with a simple message: know your rights, your neighbor did. It worked. The neighborhood that once nodded along with Sharon's newsletters now began knocking on my front door, one by one. Some came to apologize, others offered support. A few even wanted to donate to my legal fund, which I politely declined. This isn't about money, I told them. This is about drawing a line and making sure no one crosses it without asking first. A week later, the HOA called for an emergency meeting. But this time, they didn't hold it at the clubhouse. They held it at the public library, neutral ground. I didn't intend to go, but Sophie convinced me. If you don't show up, she gets the last word, she said, and you've worked too hard for that. So I put on my boots, grabbed my folder, and walked into a room full of people who, just a month earlier, saw me as the stubborn old rancher who wouldn't adapt. Now, they saw me differently. Sharon was already at the podium, flipping through her usual binder. But the crowd wasn't with her. When she opened her mouth, someone from the back shouted, "Where's the financial audit, Sharon?" Another voice, "Why was my fence fine doubled after I voted no on the landscaping project?" Sharon's face twisted into something between rage and disbelief. She raised her hand for silence. "Listen, everyone, this is getting out of control. We can't let one man dismantle our entire community standards just because he's nostalgic for horses and barbed wire." I stepped forward. "Actually, Sharon," I said evenly, "it's not about nostalgia. It's about legality. And you've been ignoring it for years." I pulled out the original deed. "My land predates your HOA by 43 years. I never signed your charter." And this road, I held up a second document, the easement agreement. It reverted to private ownership in 1999. You've been trespassing. You've been fining people without basis. And now, the county, the city, and the state are watching. She stammered something about unity and vision, but the room wasn't buying it anymore. Then David stood up in the back row. "We're filing for a court-supervised reformation of this HOA, effective immediately, and we've asked a judge for a temporary restraining order against any further board action until the hearing." That shut her up. The board had no choice. They voted 4-1 to suspend Sharon's presidency pending review. She threw her clipboard down so hard it cracked, then stormed out without a word. The rest of us just sat there, quiet for a moment. Then Mr. Peterson raised his hand. "So, Does this mean the toll booth gets historic landmark status? The room burst into laughter. And just like that, the tension broke. We had weathered the storm, but there was still one final chapter to go, one that would tie up the mess Sharon had left behind, and let us move on, not just as a neighborhood, but as neighbors. In the days following Sharon's removal from the board, you could feel a shift in the air around Willow Haven. For the first time in months, maybe years, folks were chatting in their driveways again, instead of peeking suspiciously through blinds. The HOA newsletter stopped arriving altogether, which was a blessing in and of itself, and in its place, neighbors began putting up handwritten notices about local events, tool shares, and even a community barbecue. It was as if the curtain had been lifted, and everyone realized they were never actors in Sharon's play to begin with. But no one was ready for what came next. The audit. It started as a formality, a condition set by the interim board to restore confidence and avoid a complete dissolution. They hired an independent firm, small but reputable, and gave them full access to HOA financials, minutes, and communication logs. Within 48 hours, the phone calls started. Sophie had just brewed us some sweet tea on the porch when her phone buzzed with a message from one of her friends on the oversight team. "Have you seen this?" the message read. Attached were screenshots, multiple emails from Sharon's HOA account to a landscaping company that didn't seem to exist, authorizing payments for decorative enhancement projects along the back trail fencing. The amount over $18,000. No trail improvements were ever made. Turns out, the company was a shell LLC registered under a P.O. box in another county, and the box was traced back to Sharon's second cousin, who, funny enough, had recently purchased a new boat. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The audit uncovered $11,000 paid for security improvements, which turned out to be nothing more than the rental and gas costs for the faux patrol SUV. Another $9,600 for community outreach events allegedly catered, photographed, and staffed. But the dates didn't match any events on record, and not a single vendor could verify being hired. Fines that were doubled or fabricated entirely and never deposited into HOA accounts, but rerouted to a personal PayPal registered under Sharon for order. When the final report came out, it ran 42 pages long. The HOA had not only mismanaged funds, they'd likely committed multiple counts of fraud, wire theft, and unlawful property claims. Sharon didn't show up to the emergency hearing. Instead, she sent a 2-line email. "I resign. You people are insane. I tried to make this place better." That same afternoon, the sheriff's office, the real one, issued a formal inquiry. There would be interviews, subpoenas, and most likely criminal charges. But what made headlines wasn't just the audit or Sharon's resignation. It was her meltdown. During what was supposed to be a routine town hall, a final formality before voting to restructure the HOA under temporary city supervision, Sharon showed up uninvited. She burst into the library meeting room with a stack of manila folders and a trembling voice. "You think this is justice?" she shouted. "You let that rancher run wild, charge money at a gate like he's a king and I'm the criminal. I was protecting property values. I was the only one who cared." Nobody moved. Sharon's face flushed red, her voice cracking as she slammed her folders down on a table. Paper spilled out photos of violations, printed complaints she had written herself under fake names, even a hand-drawn map that redrew HOA boundaries to include my entire ranch. "This is my neighborhood," she screamed. "You'll all regret this." And just like that, the deputies who had been waiting outside per city request stepped in quietly and escorted her away. No cuffs, no yelling, just the sound of someone who had finally reached the end of their performance. Back at the ranch, I took down the toll booth the next morning, not because I had to, but because I no longer needed to make a point. The fence had been removed the day after the audit results went public. A couple of neighbors even showed up with power tools and coffee, offering to help take it down. No fanfare, no speeches, just the quiet work of putting things back the way they were. Later that week, the county sent me a certificate recognition of historical property designation. That old ranch driveway, the one Sharon tried to fence, was now listed on the Registry of Protected Heritage Access Roads. Sophie framed it and hung it in the mudroom, right next to Grandpa's faded photo. I think he would have liked that. And as for the $20 toll sign, I kept it, mounted it on the barn wall as a reminder not of the fight, but of the line that should never be crossed again. Because fairness isn't free. Sometimes It costs exactly $20 a car. In the weeks that followed Sharon's meltdown and the final takedown of her rogue regime, the air around Willow Haven Ranch changed. Not just in the metaphorical sense, I mean the actual air. The tension that used to hang like dust after a summer harvest had cleared. For the first time in months, the sound of hammering wasn't a threat of another unwanted fence going up, but the rhythmic rebuilding of broken fences, literal and figurative, by neighbors finally working with each other, not against. I sat on the porch most evenings now, sometimes with Sophie, sometimes alone with a mug of coffee or a cold beer. The gate that Sharon's people had once padlocked was now open, wide, and free. My private road, $20. Per vehicle sign had become something of a local artifact. Folks would drive by just to take photos with it before I moved it into the barn. Someone even made a t-shirt of it, and proceeds from that shirt went to a local animal rescue, which felt fitting, considering how many times my goats had been blamed for property violations. The HOA, or what was left of it, held their first public supervised election on a bright Sunday afternoon under the pavilion by the lake. They had name tags, ballot boxes, coffee from a local shop, and best of all, laughter. People were making jokes again. They were talking again. One elderly neighbor even joked that they should just put me on the ballot for president of Willow Haven. I politely declined. I already got what I wanted, I said. A little peace, a little quiet, and my road back. The final report from the auditors was made public by the city. It wasn't just a condemnation of Sharon's actions. It was a case study in what happens when power is given without accountability. The city recommended structural oversight for all HOAs in the county, and even state lawmakers reached out to explore legislation to protect homeowners from abuse. Imagine that an old rancher's driveway turning into a catalyst for change. But to me, the real change wasn't in legislation or news articles. It was in the small things. The thank you notes slipped under my door. The teenagers who offered to help paint the barn as a community service gesture. The quiet "I'm sorry" from a neighbor who had once reported me for letting my granddaughter's swing set sit too close to the property line. And, of course, the return of my fence post, the one Sharon's people had ripped out. Someone had dropped it off, freshly stained and polished, with a little brass plate attached that read property. Pride. Peace. I mounted it back at the edge of the driveway. Not because I needed a fence anymore, but because sometimes symbols matter. As for Sharon, well, last I heard, she was living in her sister's guest house across the county line, facing charges that would take months, maybe years, to untangle. Her fall from grace was swift, sharp, and ultimately sad. But I didn't hate her. I pitied her. She was so focused on control that she forgot what communities are built on: trust, conversation, mutual respect, and a willingness to admit when you're wrong. That's what we had now. Not perfection, but progress. Sophie and I walked the property line one evening just before sunset. The golden light hit the fields just right, making the old oak trees glow. We passed by the toll booth site, now just a patch of gravel, and the echo of 1,000 tires rolling past. She nudged me. "You ever think about writing all this down?" I chuckled. "And call it how to beat a Sharon with a toll booth?" She laughed. "No. Call it what it really was, how a grandfather stood his ground." I looked out across the land, the same land my grandfather had worked. The same land I nearly lost to bureaucracy and arrogance. The same land that, even now, was growing wildflowers near the old fence posts. "Maybe I will," I said. And so here it is. A story about a fence, about $20, about a clipboard, a stubborn rancher, and a community that forgot itself and then found its way back. If you're reading this in a neighborhood where things feel a little too quiet, where decisions happen behind closed doors, or where someone tells you they have the only say, remember this: you always have a voice. You always have a choice. And sometimes, all it takes to remind folks is a wooden booth, a handmade sign, and a little bit of grit. Because respect isn't given, it's earned. One vehicle at a time.